Welcome to TrulyFit.
Olly, thank you so much for joining the TrulyFit Podcast. Why don't you give my listeners and audience a little background on who you are and what you do in the health and fitness space day to day?
Hey Steve, lovely to be on. Thanks for having me on. For me, we run an online health coaching company. We work along the physical, psychological and digestive stress areas, so it is very much a full service sort of coaching program. And that's definitely not just done by me. We bring in certain experts across the board in those three areas to help our clients through what we look for as a complete health system. I started in an in-person personal training setting. I was in a big box gym for 7-8 years. And very much came from that personal training background. And like I'm sure many of your listeners, going through that process of, personalizing and optimizing training as much as possible, right? To really get to the 10th, the percentages of how we could get these clients moving forward. And I got to the point where, they were getting stronger. They were enjoying their training. They knew the science behind what they were doing, but they simply weren't getting results. So for us, what we looked at was, there's more to this than training, right? And there's some prerequisites that are required from sleep and nutrition and general lifestyle and how they conduct themselves. It's going to make a massive difference for the amount of stress and inflammation that they're walking through the door with. So that became a natural progression for us going online, because it simply became a case of, in order for you to make the most of the training, we need to have these things in place. And for that to be a big focus for us, that just became fixing bigger and bigger problems, right? Looking at the other 95% of the pie and making sure that as we build into a whole, healthy human, we're looking at the full picture and what's required for them to move online. And that's kind of how the body reset came about.
Yeah, it's a struggle for personal trainers. A lot of people take too much pressure onto themselves when they don't get their clients to their goals. They'll say, I've been doing everything. It looks like they're in a caloric deficit. We work out 5 days a week. We do X, Y, and Z. It's like, well, you only work out with them for 1 hour. What are they doing on those other parts of their lives, right? If they have an unhealthy lifestyle, if they're on a ton of medications, if they're very stressed, which is going to be the central focus of our talk today, you can't necessarily control all of that as a personal trainer, both from a credential standpoint, but really from a time standpoint, right? If you're working in an hour by hour basis, you can't possibly put in 40 hours a week and then also have the time to basically be the babysitter of your client. So it is good to have a more, I hate to use this term, holistic approach for your clients. The only reason I don't like to use that term is because it has a negative connotation in America, at least. It seems very, quote unquote, like hippie-ish to think about the body as holistic, but that is the best term, right? We have to look at the whole body, both from a psychological perspective and also a physiological perspective, and things, even externalities outside the body that we're going to talk about, like stress and things of that nature. You talk about stress. Can you give us either a clinical definition or even just an Olly definition of what exactly do you talk to your clients about when you're like defining stress?
Yeah, I think defining what something is allows you to know what lens to look through, because I think there's a big difference between worry and stress, right? Worry is usually things you can't control. Stress are the things you can, but you're not doing, right? So we're looking through the lens of the list that's stacking up, all the to-dos, all the priorities, plural, that you're not looking after. And typically that stress amounts to a point that there's just a level of mental chatter that becomes a very physical reaction that's getting in the way of how your body operates. And if we're not managing that at some degree, that's going to make a pretty big difference on how we digest food, how we recover, how shallow our sleep is, and certainly is going to get in the way of our training.
Before we get into some of the next maybe more specifics on stress, from an intervention standpoint, do you feel, let's go back to your original days as a personal trainer, do you feel that it's okay to kind of just ask your client, hey, are you super stressed? Can we talk about your stress? Like, how do you have that first initial conversation with your client? When is it appropriate? When is it not? Because I think that's a hard thing for personal trainers to kind of wrap their heads around.
Yeah, and I think it really comes down to a level of conviction as your own profession, but also an awareness of where they are in that journey. Because some of them, they are hyper aware of stress, but they don't have the tools to look after it, meaning they hate the question because they know it's a problem and they haven't sorted it. The others are not even aware that it's happening, and they're using caffeine to wake up in the morning, and they're using alcohol or something else in order to calm down. And there's a constant external nature there that they're so disconnected with their body to even know that that's a connection. So there's two key camps there that I think are worth bringing it up, and I always would have that conversation around stress. 1 to 5, where are you sitting? And bringing it to that awareness of their own personal assessment, right? Where's your energy right now is always a funny one, because they'll say, it's a 4 out of 5, it could be better. You ask them 3 months later and they're like, dude, that was a 3, that was a 2, that was even a 1. And we just get very good, or most of the general population get very good at feeling crap most of the time. So it just becomes the new normal. And when we look at it through the lens of stress, that assessment allows us to really have a more, as you said, holistic view of how can we push this person today. And that was something that through that 7 or 8 years of personal training, and certainly now, became a transition of how I conducted my entire session, right? And I became known as that person that was really able to optimize the journey, not because I perfected exercise, right? We can all get very good at talking about movement. I think that's an area that, I'm sure if you've dove deep into that space, there's a big difference between knowing what a lunge looks like in a textbook and what that looks like in an individual that's 7 foot versus 5 foot, right? There's going to be some mechanics at play. But if you play that same nuance with, okay, well, if that person's well rested, well slept, doesn't have a huge amount going on in this week's projects, the ability to adapt to this week's workouts is significantly different than if they're underslept, they've just got off a plane from the UK, and they're thinking about 10 different things, right? So I went from a session that was 100% training to 30% nutrition, 70% training, and then 50% lifestyle design, and then 50% training, right? So over time, it became more and more about that stress and inflammatory piece that allowed us to simply make the most of the session. And I found no reason to slog someone through a full workout for a full hour if they were walking through the door with that amount of stress and hadn't eaten, right? So even some of those sessions, right, you see where people walking through the door, they're still very flustered, they forgot their running shoes, whatever. And I would give them my headphones, get them to sit in the corner for 5 minutes and just breathe, right? There's nothing that's going to happen unless you tune in and pay attention to what's happening, or you'll push your body, you're injured something, and it's not going to be productive to you moving forward. So there's a lot of considerations as a professional that we need to look at, because they're probably not. And I think bringing awareness to those pieces of the picture, even if it's outside your comfort zone, it certainly is outside theirs. But that's the thing that truly moves the needle forward, rather than just taking them through the new boot camp type session.
Yeah, and I love that it's not just a Band-Aid. A lot of trainers will have, and I do as well, what's called like an update phase. Your client comes in, you'll say, how are you feeling today? What did you eat last? What's been going on with your body? Did you sleep well last night? But if those answers are not what we want to hear, maybe we switch the routine, right? So maybe instead of doing the difficult workout, we do a lighter version of workout. We take some load off, but we don't actually fix the problem, right? We know there's an underlying problem there, especially if they've come in, let's say, 2 out of the 5 days a week for the past 3 months and say the same thing, right? I'm super stressed. I have been eating bad, and I haven't been sleeping, and I hate my job. It's like, well, if we don't address the underlying issue, we're not really fixing the problem. We're just putting quick Band-Aids on every session. So eventually, even if you said, like you mentioned, if we think it's outside of our pay grade, well, then we send them up the ladder to somebody else who can potentially deal with that. But it's still part of our obligation for their long-term health and wellness to bring that up front, right? Bring that up front in their consciousness and just say, hey, listen, just to let you know, you've been pretty stressed for the past month or so. You've been coming in here 2 days a week stressed, and I'm concerned, and I want to do what we can to make sure that you're getting to your goals. And this is hindering your goals long term. And I think having that conversation is going to be important for personal trainers moving forward, because it's not something we're taught. They don't teach you that in the textbooks when you get your first certification, how to sit down with a client. It seems above our pay grade, but in my opinion, it's not. And obviously in yours, it's not, because that's now the primary focus of your business model.
Yeah, and any profession, it's going to be an assessment of who you're working with, and whether it's a PAR-Q form and you're finding out their past injuries and medications, it should be part of that. Where's your stress? Where's your fulfillment in your work? You're asking the question, you're worried about the answer before you've asked it. And I think looking at that first just allows you to get a full assessment of the person you're working with. And I think an assessment of, if you're not a nutritionist or you're not a psychologist, it doesn't mean you don't ask the question. You just assess to what degree is this coming through. And I think in any profession, when you start to realize that there's a lot of gray in those areas, it's a spectrum, right? To what degree can I work with this up to, and then where does a professional come in? It's not black and white if I don't talk about it or they seek a psychologist, right? There's going to be some steps in between of just an assessment of the person you're working with. Yeah,
and we can sort of use the Socratic method and just ask the questions and get it out in front so that they understand what's going on, right? You don't have to give explanations. You can just say, so what do you think is going on that's making you stressed? What do you think is hindering your workout? What do you think is affecting your sleep long term, right? Just get them to start to get those wheels turning, for lack of a better term, and say what maybe they are thinking subconsciously or they're sort of pushing down out loud to you. so that they can now digest that and deal with it. And I think that's that's great information out of you. And I hope that personal trainers, again, if they think it's outside their wheelhouse, they send it up the ladder, but they don't allow that client to come in for 3 or 4 or 5 months, not meet their goals. All the while, everybody knows, both parties know that there are so many underlying issues that need to be dealt with, and that essentially you're wasting your time and they're wasting their money by you meeting every day or every other day for an hour and having them 90% of their lifestyle that is also incorporated with health and fitness is going in the wrong direction, and you're both wasting your time. Now, with that being said, we talked a little bit about it, but is there any other, I guess you would call them like general prescriptions to help people with stress? What is the first or second thing that you tell people when they say, hey, listen, I have general stress with children and work and life and finances? What are some tips and tidbits that you give clients?
Yeah, clarify what the issue is. If it's everything, it's very hard to solve.
Yeah.
If it's a moving target, you don't really know where to start. If there's one particular thing that's coming through, again, you're just asking questions to clarify. And you don't need to be, again, I'll use the version psychologist as a tool to simply ask questions. You can be asking that as a friend at a bar. You don't need to have the certification, but you can choose to use that information in between sets to ask what they did in the weekend, or you can actually have that conversation of like, how are you feeling? What's going on, right? And if that stress is coming through, you don't have to fix it. And I think especially as men, we're only asking the questions to fix the problem. But when you can ask a question in an open-minded way or an open-ended way, it allows them to simply assess what's going through. And clarity sometimes is the best you can work with. And simply that awareness of, Steve, over the last couple of weeks, you've started to tell me that your work stress is really coming through. And if I can tell you anything about the clients I work with, there's the clients that confine it with a particular time period, because I know that you're busy right now and it's not to tell you to not work. But is this going to be a 4-year thing, or is this a set 3-month project? Because if it's a 3-month project, I can work your training around it to make sure that we're just simply not going backwards and we're maintaining your current health level. But if this is something you're not aware of and this is just the new normal, then we've got to reassess what we're actually looking for here, because I cannot help you move forward in a weight training environment if this is just how you live your life and you don't have these anchors, these non-negotiables in your day, and you're just letting everything on top of you, right? And I think that's a moaning dog analogy that most people use. Is people are in a fair amount of pain and they moan about it. They're not in enough pain to actually be motivated to change. And simply clarifying that, hey, Steve, you've been complaining about the same thing for 3 months. Do you think it's time for something to change, or are you just happy living the way you are? I haven't asked them to change anything. I've simply reflected it back to them as to, is there a problem here? Right? And I think that conversation itself is just, look, I've been working with you for a little while. I've got your best interest in heart, and I want to make sure that you're making the adjustments outside here to make the change.
Yeah. And I think people ultimately appreciate honesty. So if you do get into those tough conversations, and let's say you have a client who's maybe drinking 3 or 4 days a week a little bit too heavily, and it's affecting their overall goals. Their goal is, let's say, weight loss. Eventually you saying, hey, listen, I know we've been struggling. I know we do these measurements. I know you've been asking me, Steve, why do you think I haven't gotten here? And I have to be honest with you. You're drinking 3 or 4 days a week. This is going to slow our goals down. I'm not telling you to stop. I'm just telling you that we're not going to get to where you want to be with this level of drinking. Because it's affecting your sleep, it's affecting potentially your hormones and all these other things up and down the ladder. It's not just the caloric intake of the alcohol. You have to sort of explain it from a scientific perspective too, because sometimes they just don't understand, right? Sometimes the clients don't know the questions to ask. They go, I've had so many clients say something to this extent to me, and I'm sure they have to you before too. I have vodka and water. There's no calories in that, right? It's like, okay. And then you have to go down this whole thing and say, no, alcohol actually has calories, right? 7 grams per calorie in an alcohol. And then in addition to that, there's so many other forces that are now coming down the pipe after you've taken that alcohol, like I just mentioned, the potential sleep or lack thereof due to the fact the alcohol is in there, your liver's being overworked. If your liver's working on, breaking down the alcohol, it's not doing other things it's supposed to do, and so on and so forth. So I think sometimes it's a naivete, and we have to bring those conversations up just so that we can, see all the cards, so to speak, and then have those difficult conversations in a more scientific approach.
And you're looking at it through the lens of just simply stating facts. I think I think many personal trainers, and I've certainly had this assessment where I became worried of those measurement days or those assessment days, right? And I'm like, well, if I've done everything I can on my side, how is that my concern. They should be coming in with this as an honest chat about how we can move forward. And if the training's been going well, it's like, Steve, what else is missing here? How can we make this better? And they know in the back of their head, there's that little white elephant being like, you're drinking every night, or you're still working till 10 p.m., right? And it's just a conversation of the other outside factors. And that's why finding that balance between the day-to-day feelings and relationship has to be matched with some level of facts, right? Is it going to be weight, or are you going to go a little bit deeper into body fat measurements and strength and other areas? Because that allows us to simply put an assessment over time rather than I think I'm feeling better, I think my clothes are feeling better. That conversation can work for a certain amount of time, and I think a lot of personal trainers rely on that to make sure they can get an extra 3 months out of their client that's not getting results. But if you truly want to help the person and you truly want to be known as a personal trainer or a fitness professional that is getting results for their clients, we need to make sure that we're bringing the assessment up, we're having the hard conversations. Otherwise, you're simply an underpaid and underskilled psychologist.
Good point. I have never heard it put like that, but I certainly echo those thoughts. Now, on the other end of the spectrum, do we sometimes focus too much on stress? Is it overkill? Are people giving bad information about stress, or at least information that you slightly disagree with?
Yeah, I think for me it's just nuanced. If I sat on a beach for 3 or 4 days, that'd be nice. But by the third or fourth day, I'm going to get to a point that I'm feeling a bit fidgety and I need something to do. All right. Not everyone's wired that way. They probably could live on the beach for the rest of their life. But typically, if you're working with a high-level professional, executive, business owner, they're probably wired that same way. So telling them to not stress at all is like telling a fish not to swim in water, all right? There's going to be an awareness of actually a comfort zone and a sweet spot where there needs to be a level of stress to feel like there's growth, there's resistance, there's challenge, right? That's one thing that I think most humans, hopefully all, but most, are in a position of seeing progress. And if we don't have progress, we don't have something to work towards, then we generally start to feel pretty depressed. We feel lost. We feel like there's no level of direction. So a level of stress, I redefine as being something that's a good thing. It's a level of challenge. And that's probably, what you're seeing with a level of weight training as well. You create a certain level of stress on the muscle in order to get stronger. And I think that's required in life. And I think when you look at stress as a threshold, not a level, it allows you to redefine what components of stress are being beneficial and what parts are detrimental. Because essentially, I'm sure many of the fitness professionals listening to this, or even people that are looking to make changes, they've probably had clients that are only doing yoga, right? And they're doing lots of relaxing techniques and they're calm and they're doing all these things. I'm like, mate, you just need to work, right? Like there is no strength, there's no mobility, there's just passive flexibility here, and there's zero strength in between. There's probably a huge benefit for you diving into a muscle building space or a contraction of muscles at very minimum in order to get more results. And it's simply increasing that threshold. If all you are doing is focusing on calming, de-stressing, always trying to get rid of stress in your life, you're using a very limited range of what's really happening in life. And I think it's the same as if you're trying to optimize your gut, you're trying to improve your health. The goal is not to remove toxicity or toxins from the world entirely. It's never going to happen. It's to build up a level of resilience, build up, an awareness of what toxins you can remove from food, drink, or otherwise, but an awareness of it's very much going to be a manageable threshold. And if we can bring that down so your body tolerates the parabens and the general toxins that we are exposed to on a day-to-day level, we rebuild that gut lining, we rebuild a level of immune function to tolerate it. And I think it's the same with stress. So a long-winded way of saying stress is a threshold, not a level, which means it's something that can be trained. The first instance is, of course, finding the big levers that need to be pulled in order to reduce overall stress. If we are chronically stressed 16 hours a day, that's going to be a problem. But being able to redefine it so that it's not the problem, it's an opportunity to find your sweet spot in an area where you thrive, that becomes a conversation where you're actually going to connect with the busy professional rather than telling them they need to de-stress and go live on the beach.
Yeah, and you were speaking of the toxins. I know that certain toxins kind of promote like a hormetic response in our body, which in turn makes us stronger. And if we give like a weightlifting analogy, when I pick up a threaded barbell enough times, eventually I start getting calluses on my hands, which I have, right? But if I go past a certain threshold, as the term you used, well, then I'm going to rip those calluses open. My hands are going to be bloody and I can't use them, right? So we have to find that line of sort of, you're not quite at diminishing returns yet, and it's still appropriate for you. And I think we shouldn't take that away from clients too. You'll see some people who tell their clients, oh, you could eat whatever you want. You could do whatever you want. We'll take it easy. We'll do this. By your clients not being able to push past that stress, they don't get the that high from actually knowing that they achieved something and they gave something up and they sacrificed to get to where they are and got to their goals.
Yeah, we've got two general personalities here, right? We've got the stress addiction sort of specialists where they just find ways to be more stressed and they're used to being in that space, and that seems to be the only way that they have energy, right? And you see it with a busy professional that the only way that they get shit done is by having a deadline, right? And when they have that there, they're able to really focus. And they do their 10-hour day and then they go to a spin class, or they find a way to get, sweaty in a HIIT class afterwards. Where for them, it'd be like, dude, just go for a walk. Like, create some pause in your day and you'll be benefit. And that's bringing that that's a case of simply, I think, connecting their body with their head again, right? Just the awareness of, let's just tune in a wee bit more, because you're running 1,000,000 miles an hour and you're not taking the time to tune in. The other side of that is I feel too stressed. I'm like, dude, you don't even work, right? Like, let's get to a level of building this up. So I think there is two levels, because there's someone who is, okay, we need to build this threshold because you've suddenly labeled any stress as bad. You have a very low threshold. And this is where something like weight training or a level of creating some level of stress and stimulus can be super beneficial, all right? Whereas, it depends on what type of person you work with, but that tends to be two categories. And it really becomes you need to know the person before you have the conversation around stress. Because if you have the I need to stress you more conversation to the stress addict, they're like, yeah, but it's not going to fix it, right? Whereas if you have it to the person that needs a little bit of stimulus and you package it in a way that allows you to build this up slowly, you're ultimately finding a middle ground for both of those individuals.
Yeah, I'm sure there's a lot of people listening who are immediately thinking of clients who fit into those particular categories, because we all have that. And it is important, like you said, to make sure that the information you're not giving is not just blanket information on stress. The people who are too stressed, you need to do what you can to sort of calm them down and back them off of what they're doing. And the people who think that doing one thing, they don't work all day, they show up and like a piece of machinery that they planned on using for their workout happens to not be there and they're throwing a fit. You have to calm them down and understand that, hey, I'm ready. I have a backup plan as a personal trainer. It's okay. I have some principles here. We don't just need to work on one particular piece of equipment. I'm going to get you to your goals anyway, and calm them down. Now, speaking about principles and ideology and lifting, it sounds like I'm just going to put words in your mouth and you tell me if I'm wrong. Based upon all the things that you say, I doubt that you have a specific ideology around lifting. I'm sure you're not saying everyone needs to use the kettlebell, everyone needs to do CrossFit. I'm sure you have particular principles and you fit the equipment into those principles to get clients to their goals. But tell me, when you sit down with a client and have an assessment, and this is just from the fitness perspective, okay, what exactly do you think that you'd be using to help them get to their goals on a regular basis? Are you more apt to use something like a TRX suspension trainer, body weight, dumbbells, or is your answer going to be it really does depend on their specific goals?
Right. For me, I think all the equipment is kind of irrelevant because it's simply just a tool to contract a muscle, right? At the end of the day, the goal should be contracting muscles more effectively. And I think the rule that blanket rule overall it's not a blanket rule, but I think an assessment that allows us to look through the lens of, we work with a very specific type of client at a very, very specific time in their life, right? So they're in their mid 40s or 50s, they're noticing their body slowing down and things aren't working like they used to. So from an exercise professional, if we just look at that component, they're either not exercising at all or they're exercising really, really hard on the wrong stuff, right? And typically that's more in a cardio space. And I think where the issue comes through is that we're focusing on, so many people are focusing on more effort externally, right? Lifting dumbbells up and down, running more distance, whatever that might be. But there's very little consideration to the contraction and stimulus to the body in order to create a result. So we would certainly look at a foundation of weight training as being a core component of improving body composition. If we're just looking at body composition lens for that particular audience in their mid 40s and 50s, they're typically an audience that either is worried of weight training and has never done it before, or the way that they're doing it is, again, very external, focusing on the dumbbell in front of them. So that assessment of simply tuning in, which is, again, very similar to how we'd approach nutrition, sleep, general conducting their lifestyle, is making sure that they're tuning into the contraction and the ability to progress that over time. So whether that comes through a cable, a dumbbell, a barbell, there's going to be assessment of how your body moves. It's not a case of forcing your body into a particular machine, right? So how Ollie moves is going to be different to Steve, and how Steve moves is going to be different to Cindy, right? So looking at that space allows us to simply focus on what does your body need rather than a particular machine that you're emotionally attached to. Because if we can build that together, I think that makes a really big difference. And I would start there.
You mentioned that people in their 40s and 50s, the vast majority of the demographic that you're working with will typically come in one of two ways, right? So you have the people who are not exercising at all, and they find that their body is slowly withering away. And then you have the other people who are exercising, let's just use the word improperly. And typically that will be of the ilk of someone doing too much high intensity, just always pushing it, right? Saying, I'm going to work out 2 or 3 days a week, but all I'm going to do is work out as hard as I possibly can. Do you find that those people are the people who are the stressors, usually the people who are highly stressed, and they say, I just need to go on a 4-mile run as fast as I can because I only have this time, or I got to go to this Orange Theory class 3 days a week, and just it's all about the calories. I have to make sure that I burn as many calories as I can. And how do you deal with those people who are so addicted to that sort of training style?
Yeah, it's actually quite a concern of mine in the space of fitness right now, because what we're seeing is there's so much gamification of exercise. There's so much of an entertainment factor that nobody even has a clue what their body's actually doing, right? They're just looking at the screen in front of them and saying, I'm going to look at my heart rate and say that that's good. Well, it's more nuanced than that. Are you contracting the right muscles, or are you bashing joints? And when we go through that process of simply tuning in and taking a step back, I'm going to assume that you enjoy the things that you're good at, right? And what tends to happen is we are not, we feel, a client explained this to me the other day. He feels like an alpha in the boardroom and he doesn't feel like an alpha in the gym, right? So what happens is he finds some way to feel better, right? He's going to find a way to do the Orange Theory class. He's going to find a way to make sure he's looking at a big fancy screen of riding through the mountains rather than actually tuning into what his body's doing. And there's a place for that, right? I think you still need to enjoy exercise at some point, but I think you need to enjoy the result just as much. And what's happening is we're finding that, clients are doing, before they're joining, or working with us, they're generally doing 5, 10, 15 years of circuit classes, and they look exactly the same or worse than they did when they started, right? They enjoy the class. There's a social element. Fantastic. But what are you actually doing to get the results you're after? And I think that's an assessment of, usually when a individual comes to work with a fitness professional, it's because they've finally gone, hang on, I actually want results. I don't want to just jump up and down, right? And when you look at that through that lens, you need to be the one that takes the assessment seriously around like what's going to work for you as an individual, rather than how do we fit you into another class full of 40 people jumping up and down. And that really is a tuning in conversation. So, I think it's just an awareness of, there's a concern overall that we are becoming as plugged into the system as possible. And it's completely getting in the way of us listening to our own signs and signals of our body. And we focus a ton on gut health and awareness of really how you're digesting foods, how you're conducting your day, how you're adapting and responding to stress, right? Because there's a significant difference, and I'm sure you find the same, Steve. If you put yourself back into the space you were 5 years ago, you'd be like, this is so relaxing. How am I like at all stressed with what's going on? Compared to what I'm working with now, it's a new level, right? It's a threshold that I've built up over time. I'm used to a new level of stress. And I think just looking at that through the lens of, most people don't deal with that stress particularly well, and they just disconnect mind to body. It's just a head on top of a meat suit, right? And until we take the time to tune into that process, we're working with a very unaware human. And I think that's it's a big part that is potentially overdone. It's said a lot, but I don't think many people listening. It's just, there needs to be an awareness to health. And until you tune in, that becomes a process where you're having to do the things rather than wanting to do the things, right? It needs to be a shift. And I'm sure for you, Steve, you actually probably looked forward to a certain type of workout because you know how good you feel afterwards. Most clients are just going, I have to do this to get the result. And until you make that shift and you actually find something that fits into the person you want to become, and you're just taking out those actions day to day, that's going to make a significant difference on how long you stick to it.
Yeah, it's harder for the general public to do this. So we as personal trainers have to do this. Sometimes we have to audit our programs that we have with our potential clients and say, is this the right program for them? Or even audit their entire sort of whatever they're doing in health and fitness. So maybe they're only coming to you once a week, and maybe they're going to Orange Theory twice a week. Maybe they're going on long runs another day of the week. Eventually you have to sit down with them and say, hey, listen, I know that you enjoy this, but let's be honest. This is your goal, right? Maybe your goal is to put on 12 pounds of muscle. And all you're doing is this intense cardio because that is how you disassociate, right? You have a long day at work and you just want to disassociate. So you go on these long runs and you tell yourself you're being healthy, but really you have knee and ankle issues from the constant repetitive pounding. And we're not getting to your goals of putting on 12 pounds of muscle because you're in a caloric deficit because you're burning so many calories going running, right? So like this is a common thing that happens, I think, amongst personal trainers, is that their clients do things outside of the space of working with them. And maybe they're afraid to kind of have the conversation about what they're doing outside of there. But ultimately, if we're worried about their long-term health and wellness, we have to say, hey, listen, like I know you didn't necessarily ask me to talk about this with you, but you're when we're here one-on-one, what you do outside of this affects our goals. And we have to have the conversations about what you're doing and make sure that everything comes together. What I find is, the older population is a little bit easier to convince of this because typically they've had an injury or something, right? So they're ready to change. So the men that I work with who are 50 and 60 love using the Pilates Reformer because they get a little bit more flexible for golf, and they've gone through injuries. So they're maybe a little bit more hesitant to pick up heavy weights, but convincing a 25-year-old that maybe they shouldn't just move in one plane of motion and lift heavy weights is a difficult thing to do.
Yep.
So lastly here, give me a full rundown of your business model. I know you talked a little bit about this in the beginning, but I know how it came together. But tell me about the intricacies, because I'm always interested to hear, and I'm sure my listeners are too, putting together something that really hasn't been done before. It doesn't seem like there was a blueprint. You just said, hey, this is important, so I'm going to pull these pieces together. And I find the most successful people do that, right? There's no blueprint. They're just a little trial and error, and they have an idea, and they're passionate about it. So tell us a little bit about how that all came together.
Yeah, well, it's absolutely an iterative process. It started off with a simple set of videos and guides that allowed them to understand the prerequisites that were required for a certain individual to get a result, right? For a particular individual that I work with as a busy professional in their mid-40s and 50s. And when we took those considerations into account, we started to understand what parts worked, what parts didn't, what parts they needed to focus on, what parts were less relevant. And I think that allowed me to, as a fitness professional, at the end of the day, most people know that they need to eat more and eat better food. Eat better food and generally move more, contract muscles better, right? Their general concept is there. They can buy a $7 a month app, or they can work with a busy professional, or a fitness professional, in order to create a personalized plan for them. So what you're looking for is not just accurate information, you're trying to find relevance. And I think that's a significant shift when you start to look at how you're packaging your service, is making sure that there's so much information out there. That is not the goal. The goal is to make it accurate and then relevant for that age and stage of that individual. So knowing that and it sounds like you're a fan of niching down to a particular audience so that you really know you can help this person as best as possible rather than just anyone. And when you look at it through that lens, you can start to realize that, okay, well, you're focusing on step 7 before you've actually done step 1, 2, and 3. So if we adjust the order of this, we can actually get more out of your body, make sure things are operating well, rather than simply just throwing as much shit at the wall and seeing what sticks. And when we take the time to look at it in that order, it allows us to build in an awareness of ultimately a sequence of steps that become your method, all right? And that's an iterative approach over time. I've now worked with over 3,000 clients in a one-on-one setting to understand what that looks like for this particular type of individual. That's not just general population. That's busy professionals and business owners in their mid-40s and 50s. So and then there's a whole nuance of menopause and understanding what that looks like through perimenopause and menopause, and understanding where to start, what to focus on first, right? So that absolutely is an iterative process of just finding out, okay, this worked well, this was too early, and now we get to the point that we're like, we know what's happening in about 2 months for you, because you're going to go through this, and this step, and then we need to do this, otherwise you'll feel like things are, not working, right? So when you have that level of confidence and conviction around how you approach transformation and whatever version that looks like for you, then it becomes simply a system of applying that to their particular lifestyle in a way of there's variables here at play, but there are also things that are constants that we know are true. And when you're able to define that person that you work with and the sequence of steps required to get them to the result, they are then paying you for speed and certainty, which is what you can't get through, a $7 app, right? And when we create that, that's the level of white glove service that we're generally after. So if we're going to simplify that model for you, this awareness of where we start is we go through what we call our R4 method. Our reset for us is very much just simplifying where to start. What are the habits that are required for you to start to build some momentum? If we look at it through the lens of sleep and energy, that allows us to really bring an awareness to how you feel on a day-to-day basis, right? It's bringing awareness to just how ultimately awareness. That in itself is going to take you from just focusing on the external goal, which, by the way, if you just focus on a goal, it doesn't get you any closer. What are the actions required to get you there? Once we have that, we actually do quite a big deep dive with our repair phase, going into their blood work, understanding what's happening behind the scenes, and looking at it through a lens of what are those key biomarkers, that we need to address, what are the organs that we need to support, how do we make sure the body's truly functioning at a high degree. So R1 and R2 for us is very much a front-loading health, like actually getting your body back on your side. And I think one issue for a lot of people is that they are so focused on the fat loss right away that it's calorie deficit, start from day one. I'm like, well, if you're stressed, you're not sleeping and nothing else is working, why are we starting there, right? We're running on fumes. And this is a awareness I've had from, being in phases of dropping body fat, building muscle, going to the extreme of even doing bodybuilding shows and, doing quite well in the space, is there was a massive difference between what I did in my first and second prep to what I did in my sixth and seventh, right? And that awareness of being able to build up the amount I could consume over a certain period where I was having 4,000, 6,000, 8,000 calories a day, and then I'd drop down to 5,000 calories, and then I'd drop body fat, right? Like I'm dropping body fat at 5,000 calories a day. So that starts to give you an awareness of how much you can build the engine, you can build that metabolic rate so that you've actually got something to work with. And I think so many people are so underfueled and under-eating that they're trying to force the calorie deficit when they have no foundation in place. So that's something we do very differently that allows us to look through the lens of, hence why it needs to be not just a training approach, but we're looking at it through, mindset, we're looking at it through that digestive capacity to look at the full model. Once we build R1 and R2, then we can really have a conversation around that quality and quantity piece going through our restore and reinforce phases.
How do you have the conversation around medication with your clients? I imagine that's a difficult one, right? You're looking at their labs, you're looking at their goals, and maybe they're on a medication which you have a strong suspicion is causing an issue, right? That but you're fighting against, the quote unquote expert who told them to be on this medication, and maybe you don't want them to be on that. How do you initiate that conversation? How does that go down?
I just ask, what are they for? And they're like, inevitably they say, I don't know. Right? And it's like, okay, well, it might be good to know that you've got a prescription to be on this thing, but it would be really nice to know that, is this something you're on for life? Is this something that you've got a game plan to come off? And is this a conversation that you've had with your medical professional or whoever has put you on this drug? Especially with our clients in America, I think that's worse than most places in the world, is they've talked to 5 different experts and they're on 5 different drugs that all counteract each other, right? So that awareness of being like, well, who's your main point of contact? Who do we need to have a conversation about this to make sure that these are truly something you need to be on? Again, at the end of the day, we need to be in scope. We need to make sure that we're in the right spot. But I think simply, again, like the stress conversation, are we having the conversation? Do you know what you're on these for? Have you had a conversation of how you would get off them? Or is this truly something we can do to look at through a nutritional and lifestyle element alongside your medical professional in order to actually create a plan to get off it, right? And I think that's a real concern, or again, it's clarification. As their coach, I'm simply asking how we can get the best results for you. And if you're talking to 5 different experts and they've never communicated to each other, I'm assuming this is probably not the best personalized plan for you, all right? So I think that's where we would start. Hey, I know that these 3 drugs are something you need to stay on, but there's another 10 here that I have no idea what they're doing, and I'd like some clarification of what's actually going on. If you could have that conversation with your doctor, I think it would be really beneficial for you more than anyone to make sure we have a bit of a plan moving forward. And if we can work around it, we can help and assist this process. If we have a plan that I can work with your professional in order to help assist in any sort of recovery component here, then let's start there. But we need at least need to have that conversation.
Olly, this has been a great conversation. I appreciate your time. Why don't you tell my audience where they can find everything about you? If it's, let's say, a personal trainer, someone in the fitness space who wants to reach out to you directly, maybe they have questions about what you do in your business model, they're intrigued, they want to do something similar, or maybe it's somebody on the other side, general population, who wants to work with you or ask questions concerning their health.
Yeah, for us, we put out a ton of free content. I think we're really shifting how people think about nutrition beyond simply calories in, calories out, or how they adjust the model to work in their favor and making sure that they're getting their body back on their side. So whether you're a fitness professional trying to improve your service, or whether you're a individual trying to improve their own health and make sure that they're looking at the right steps for them, I think there's 3 main platforms. One would be Instagram, probably the easiest social media platform just to catch up on the short form content that we put out in regards to thought-provoking ideas of focusing on the right steps. If you're wanting to go through a bit more of a sequence, step-by-step process of getting your health back on your side, go to our main website, bodyreset.online, and you can go through our 5-day challenge, either male or female, to know where to start and what to focus on for you. And then lastly, if you're more of a podcaster, you like this more long-form content, then again, just search Your Body Reset on Spotify or any of your major platforms, and you can go a little bit deeper into some of these sort of deeper trainings.
My guest today has been Olly Wood. Thank you so much for joining the TrulyFit Podcast.
Thanks, man. It was really, really great to jump on. Always great talking to another fitness professional and asking the questions that we know are rampant in the industry and being able to give you a different response.